Okay, so let's talk about Sean Mckay's concentric zone theory. Now, it was developed in 1924, which was a pivotal year because that was the year that the Naturalization Law, Immigration Act was passed in 1924, Naturalization Immigration Act. And that was a way for the United States to stop the flow of Eastern European immigration coming into the United States. There's always been this backlash against immigrants in this country. It used to happen in waves. And in 1924, they were targeting Eastern European immigrants as well as Mexican immigrants who were coming into the United States. So oftentimes these people, when they came into the United States as new arrivals, they would go to densely populated inner city neighborhoods. And Chicago was one of those places where a lot of people who were Slavic and Polish and Romanian, and let me see, I think there were also some Italian immigrants coming in at that time. There was a wave of Italian immigrants as well that were coming into the United States. So they were starting to move into the inner city communities in the city of Chicago. So Sean Mckay basically set up this model to look at how these neighborhoods were forming and how at the same time you had this heavy population of immigrants, you started seeing a rise in crime. So the heaviest crime were in the inner city zones that had the largest immigrant population. There's something very interesting that happens when you have people coming from diverse backgrounds converging upon the same community. Instead of them integrating and kind of working together and getting to know each other, what happens is they turn inward. So instead of connecting and integrating, they sort of shut out groups that are different than themselves and they kind of turn inward. And what you have is what is called like a negative impact of heterogeneity, where there's difference among groups and that difference becomes a competition for resources. Crime is a product of transitional neighborhoods where there's social disorganization and conflict over values. So again, when you have all of these diverse populations living among each other, you're going to have social disorganization and conflict that comes over values because the culture is different. And again, people are competing for scarce resources. So children are starting to children living in these broken communities become exposed to gang influence, and gangs oftentimes arise out of poverty, a lack of economic resources that people need in order for them to be able to pay their bills or feed themselves or provide for their families. So children living in broken communities become torn between following the conventional norms of law and order and being law-abiding versus, again, deviant values or the values of criminal gangs. So the key to reducing crime is to create community programs and youth recreation to keep these kids busy and to keep them off the streets. So I have put together a chart that breaks down how these communities are formed. And I hope you won't hear my dog in the background because she's starting to go crazy. Sit down, Rosie. Okay, so this is basically how it looks. And I don't know if this is going to look backwards to you or not, but hopefully it won't. So think about the city of Detroit. So here you have the Central Business District. This is the downtown area. And just beyond that is the Transitional Zone. So when immigrants come into the United States and they begin to converge upon an inner city or a city, then they tend to live in housing just outside the business, the downtown area, or what we call the Central Business District. And this is transitional housing, as I said a moment ago. These are transitional communities because the people are not going to live there long term. So they're kind of in and out. They're not buying property in those neighborhoods. They're just kind of living there and renting until they can make enough money where they can move out. And then as they move out of the transitional community, they move into what is called the working class zone. So here you'd have more small tract style homes that were being built around the early 20th century through land grants that were provided by the government. And you had white immigrant, working class families that were moving into these homes. And as they began to work and move up the social ladder, then they were able to move into what was called the residential zone. So this is where you have more green yards, grass, trees, parks, more recreational areas for the community, sort of like going from Detroit to maybe Oak Park to like Farmington Hills. And then you have the commuter zone. The commuter zone is even beyond the residential zone. These are people who live completely out of the city of Chicago, and they take the trains in to the central business district where they work, and then they take the trains out of those districts. And this is where you have upper middle class families. So with each one of these communities, you're going to see the impact of crime, or you'll see a change in the crime rate with each one of these communities, where you're going to find most of your heavily criminal areas are going to be in the central business district and the transitional zone. But as you move further out, crime starts to decrease.